Hey gang, today I wanted to take you through my process for a heavy metal minimalist style Ultramarine. Step 1. Base coats. For the blue areas, I'm using Imperial Navy from Army Painter, and if you prefer Warhammer brand paint, then Night Lord's Blue is the most similar. I try to use a colour here that will give a bit of colour to the Nuln Oil. This is so I don't have to use a dark blue shade for blue bits and a brown shade for gold or a red shade for red, etc. I can just use Nuln all over and have a tint underneath to colour it as needed. This layer doesn't need to be perfect, but try and make the coverage uniform. This will help in step 3, as patchy base coats may show through the top coat later. For gold areas, I'm using Warhammer brand Screaming Bell, but something like AK's Copper will work as well. For the blue, I used a dark blue, but for the gold, I'm using a dark orangey red colour. If I used gold, it would not end up with that deep contrast that we're looking for. Using this dark copper will also add a nice reddish tone to the shadows. This will help the gold finish to pop more, and overcome that problem metallics have of being shiny. Obviously, this will still be metallic, but that sparkle will be reddish orange instead of gold yellow, creating more depth. The sparkle will also be dulled from step 2. You could also use a dark silver like Warhammer brand Leadbelcher. This will make a desaturated shadow for the gold. If your mini has red as a main colour, like a Blood Angel, using a silver here would help create distance between the gold and the red plates, where using a reddish copper might blur the shadows from the plates and the shadows from the gold into one blob. The aim is to create the distance between armor panels and segments like trim, so they're all separated out, so when they're on tabletop you can still see the definition and details of the mini at a distance. Go over any metallics that you spilt onto the blue base. It's less important to clean up the blue on top of metallic, but you can fix those too. If there is metallic over blue, then the shadows will look off later, as they will be a slightly reddish tinge and a little bit sparkly when they should be that deep blue colour. Step 2. Nuln Oil. With this bit, you do not need to be careful. Just slop it on, puddle it in the edges and recesses for darker shadows, and try and do entire panels in as few strokes as you can all at once, otherwise you may get tide lines as it dries. While this dries, make a cup of tea and think about how you are superior to people who like Blood Angels and their dead Primarch. Step 3. Top coats. For the blue areas, I'm using Crystal Blue by Army Painter. The Warhammer brand Techless Blue is a decent alternative. You want to pick a nice saturated colour for this layer, as it will be the majority of the finished mini, as it is only highlights after this. On pieces like the pauldron with trim, these are the inside corners for the blue. I leave about a 1mm gap between my top coat blue and the corner crease so I can have a dark outline to separate the bright blue from the trim a bit more. For the base coats, I didn't water down my paint beyond making it easy to slap on. For these top coats, I did water it down a little bit so I could move it around easier on the mini to create the shape I wanted before going back over with a thicker coat to concrete it in. If you do a couple of thin layers, leaving the coverage kind of patchy and uneven, this can look more battle-worn, and you can use those brushstroke lines and patchinesses to help plan out any weathering or battle damage you want to add. I don't really do battle damage, and this isn't a tutorial for that, so I'm just going to kind of keep it thick and keep it uniform and kind of flat looking. So then it will come out looking kind of super new and clean compared to a more worn finish. Be most careful in the recessed armor, such as on this arm under his elbow and wrist plate, to not get the bright blue on the perpendicular sides of these extruded surfaces. I'm still trying to keep that 1mm border on the inside corners, but don't worry too much where the gap gets too thin, as long as those perpendicular sides stay clean and dark. Like this video, subscribe, potentially become a channel member to get exclusive channels in my Discord where I post pictures of my kitten and I take requests for tutorials to make. I also stream painting on here and Twitch if you want to come hang out and ask questions or watch me be bad at Space Marine 2. For the gold, I'm using Warhammer brand Retributor armor. The AK Old Gold is also a good alternative. This trim only has outside corners. This is where the panel reaches a cliff edge rather than a wall. Keep the sides of the trim the dark shaded colour. It's hard to fix this if you spill over, as it is the base colour plus the Nuln Oil. This counts to the blue as well. I recommend picking a plane to be the top, and then keep perpendicular sides dark over the whole mini. If you want to have some extra depth, you can leave any down or backwards facing surfaces with no top coat, and to use the top coat colour as highlights as per step 4 on those faces. Step 4. Highlights. On the gold, I'm using Runefang steel by Warhammer. The AK natural steel is the alternate I would recommend. For metallics, I tend to pick outer edges or corners to highlight, and then a secondary bright spot if I feel like the vibe is right for it. Try and feather out these highlight spots, as metallics are pretty forgiving, but sharp transitions can stick out in the wrong lighting. On the blue, I'm using Bright Sapphire by Army Painter. The Warhammer brand Blue Horror is probably your closest match otherwise. Here I am essentially outlining all my top coat blue with outside edges, or like on this elbow panel, a sculpted edge in the middle of an entirely top-coated section. Because we're doing these over the top coat, if you make a mess, we can go back over this later with more of that top coat colour. Again, try not to slip up onto the dark areas as it will be harder to fix. If you want some more depth, only do these edge lines on front and top facing edges, but I would only recommend this if you also did this with the top coat as well. Otherwise, go all over and edge up all of those cliff edges. I tend to water down my paint a bit for this, just so I can use a smaller brush so the paint doesn't dry before I put it on the mini. If you find the edges to look too pale, mix in some of the top coat colour until you find a shade you're happy with. Adding more top coat will lead to more subtle edges, which can be nice if you then use the unmixed highlight paint to do some dot highlights on the corners of the edge highlights. To clean up these highlights, as they are only on the top coat, you can carefully straighten up wonky highlight lines and make the highlight lines thinner and fix any mistakes that you made by just using the top coat previously, in this case crystal blue. This is probably the bit that took the longest, as I wanted to be careful to not have to redo highlights and to get the thinness of edge lines that I wanted. If you do the highlights perfect first time, then maybe you don't need to do this, but because I knew I could just fix them up after with more top coat, I was more sloppy with the pale lines than I maybe should have been. If you're going into a fully built and glued mini, only do step 3 onwards on bits you can reach. This will, by accident, make a nice shadow area behind guns and under arms that will make him look a little more dramatic and lit. With sub-assembly, you can get every surface to look flat and uniform with lighting, so ending with a more cartoony or classic heavy metal result. The rest of the owl. From this video, learn the things and put it to use on the rest of the mini. Using this style is good for quick, consistent minis that only use a handful of paints. In total, this arm took me about 15 to 20 minutes, not including the non-oil drying tea break. If I was going to do the whole mini at once, I doubt it would take much longer than that, as it is a very simple style to do. This is my fully finished Infernus Ultramarine in this style with all of his markings free-handed in. You can see on this one I used a more subtle edge highlight and only on the top and front-facing surfaces. I will make videos for the lenses, various guns, and free-handing hacks, so don't panic if yours doesn't look like this. I don't tend to use transfers, but I can cover those in a video as well. As always, thanks for watching. Check out my other hobby content or my dumbass gaming content on the main channel. Like, sub, leave a comment how you got on, Discord in the description, and see ya!